This is Midwest Moxie, a show about our region's visionary founders and the experiences that shape them. I'm your host, Kathleen Gallagher, Executive Director of Five Lakes Institute. Jay Whitacre wasn't sure he'd be an entrepreneur, but less than a year after he joined Carnegie Mellon's faculty, his research into low-cost sodium-ion batteries yielded an important breakthrough. Soon Jay found himself meeting with high-profile venture investors, even having dinner with former Vice President Al Gore. The result was Aqueon Energy, a sodium-ion battery maker that grew to more than 100 employees and raised more than $200 million before being acquired in 2017. 5 years later, Jay founded another company, Pittsburgh-based Stratus Materials, which creates novel materials for next-generation vehicle batteries. It has 25 employees and has raised $12 million. Jay, welcome to Midwest Moxie.
Thank you.
You have an undergraduate degree in physics from Oberlin and a PhD in materials science and engineering from Michigan, and you're very interested in energy. So, how did you end up in the Jet Propulsion Lab at Caltech working with the Mars rover team?
It's a great question. It doesn't sound like much of a linear path from my early interests. It's true, though. When I was getting my undergrad in physics, I worked with a great mentor, John Schofield, and I learned a lot about solar panels, solar cells, photovoltaic materials. And that got me really interested in energy technology in general. And then I went to University of Michigan to work on thin film technologies, which at the time I thought was going to be for solar cells as well, and solar energy materials. And then I took a slight left turn and I took a postdoc at Caltech. And during that postdoctoral scholarship, I focused on thin films, not for solar cells, but for batteries. And I didn't know anything about batteries to speak of beyond what most people would have learned in a classroom. But I happened to get slotted in with a really great team of people that then led to a full-time job at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which Caltech runs. So I spent 1 year sort of as a Caltech postdoc and then sort of switched into JPL. And once I was there, I realized that even though it was for aerospace, there was still a lot of great energy research to be done. And I worked on large format lithium ion batteries in the very earliest days of these things, actually, for aerospace applications, specifically for interplanetary robots in the early 2000s. And that's sort of how I got, my interest in energy was translated into this different thing, which was not solar power, but instead energy storage. And the interesting segue through that was this aerospace world that I spent 7 years at.
So that says something about you, something very interesting. Some academics, really stay in one alley, and you were quite willing to move from one thing to another, interdisciplinary, I guess you call it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it depends. Everyone has sort of the different way they think about their career or their work, but I have always been interested in doing things that relate to energy, one way or another, making it more efficient, figuring out how to use it best, how to reduce emissions. There's many, many ways to do that. And if it's energy storage versus solar power versus wind power, I'm interested in all those things. But I happen to have an opportunity in front of me that was focused on energy storage and lithium ion batteries, and so I jumped on that.
So, however you can get there.
Yeah.
After Caltech, you joined the faculty at Carnegie Mellon, and shortly after that, you founded your first company, Aqueon Energy, around these breakthroughs that you had using lower cost sodium rather than lithium ions to carry the charge between the positive and negative poles of batteries. You were dealing with some big names, Bill Gates, Kleiner Perkins. You even had dinner with Al Gore, as we mentioned. Tell us about the ups and downs of that experience.
Yeah, it was. I was still fairly young at the time. This was 2008 timeframe, and I kind of felt like I got plucked off the sidewalk and put into a movie or something because it was. I went from sort of being an assistant professor, dabbling with some ideas that I thought were kind of cool, to having an idea that was consistent with the investment thesis of this very prominent venture firm. And then being funded by them and sort of being elevated to all of their connections and elevated in many ways in terms of having operating partners help me grow the company and understand how to make good decisions and all of that stuff. So it was a real crash course over the first 3 or 4 years after that happened. And it was a remarkable experience, really. The things that happened in those early days ranged from fundamental technical changes and innovations. It's true that the company was founded on a sodium ion technology, and I think I was among the first to do that in the United States anyway. And then it morphed into what we call a hybrid iron, which actually used both lithium and sodium, and it got much more complicated. But it always used water as an electrolyte, so it was very inexpensive.
So after Aquion, the company got acquired for a loss. We'll talk about that. But you went back to Carnegie Mellon and you ran the Energy Institute. And it's interesting. Sodium ions were a great carrier of the battery charge, and they're still in play today. They're kind of popular right now. But given that lithium ions had become so dominant, you started asking what kinds of technologies you could work on that would play an important role with those type of batteries. So what did you come up with?
Sure. So the one of the learnings from Aqueon was that lithium-ion batteries grew much faster than people thought they would, and they became less expensive faster than was expected. And it was clearly going to be a dominant technology for multiple decades. So my thought, as I went back to CMU and sort of contemplated whether or not to jump back into the entrepreneurial world, was what's the best thing I can do to help this technology do best? And the truth is that there's a lot of struggle right now getting the supply chain in North America fully up to speed to service the lithium ion battery industry. And a large fraction of that is the cathode material. So the cathode material is the cathode is a plus side of a battery. And it's this powder that goes in it and it plays the critical role in storing energy. And the ions shuttle between the cathode and anode during charging and discharging. So the problem with current cathodes is that they have cobalt. They're very expensive. They're somewhat dangerous, and there's a lot of desire for something that has attributes that are superior to what's on the market right now.
Not to
And
mention that China controls a lot of the supply chain for cobalt,
they
which
do
is
exactly,
political problem, right?
and there's geopolitical issues, and cobalt on top of that is also often sourced in Africa, which has another level of geopolitical and social issues in general. So it's a real challenge. So getting rid of that is a huge plus. Reducing the amount of nickel, it's a huge plus. So during COVID, I kind of set up a little lab off Carnegie Mellon's campus because the labs were closed there, and I wanted to kind of dabble in this. And revisited some things that both I'd seen in the early 2000s when I was still at JPL in Caltech, and also one of my recent graduate students, Sven Burke, also had done some interesting work that showed the relationship between processing the material and how it could perform, and how we might be able to make it this a known material that has no cobalt and is inexpensive and is low in nickel, but was really unstable and didn't work that well. There were some interesting process tricks that surfaced, and I was able to dial a couple of them in concert and showed, wow, this really does work. If I combine a couple of different innovations at the same time, this material is stable and it does work and it is very inexpensive and it really could matter. So that was the sort of the kernel that from which Stratus Materials grew, which was this idea of creating a company that's focused on relieving pressure in the supply chain for cathode materials for electric vehicles, and it's a huge market. It's a 60 to $100 billion market per year. A decade from now, if you believe the growth trends that are predicted for electric vehicles. So there's an awful lot of activity in the marketplace that could be won by a good solution like this.
So we started out saying that you weren't sure you'd be an entrepreneur, but I'm beginning to get the sense you can't really help yourself.
No, I kind of I guess I get bit by the bug after I experienced sort of the freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur and seeing and also the incredible satisfaction that comes with being part of and growing a great team, and having the control over who's on that team and how to like acculturate people and get everyone on the same page and really feeling that camaraderie. You just don't get that in many places, and it's something that I missed when I left JPL. And it's being an academic is a fantastic experience as well, but you don't have the same we're all on the front lines together camaraderie as you have in a small company. And so once I experienced that one time, and also once I sort of got my intellectual sort of stimulation from having new ideas and watching them come to fruition in products or in prototypes, that was just such a rush. And so I absolutely am, I think, a lifelong innovator and entrepreneur at this point because of that.
At Aquion Energy, you built a plant in Pennsylvania to produce the batteries. This time with Stratus Materials, You want to use less capital and work with an existing factory rather than build one. That's, I
Yeah,
guess, a lesson learned, right?
it is. I think, especially in this current capital market and this current venture market, it's never easy, but it's relatively easier to get a small amount of seed funding or early stage funding to get a company going. It's much harder to raise that 50, 100, 200 million dollars to stand up a true pilot line or small production facility of whatever it is you're making. If it's an energy technology, that is highly risky. You're typically, if you have any revenue, it's very small. If you have a product, it's not well defined and will probably change at that point. And investors see a lot of risk. And so getting that kind of capital to come in and to get that funding at reasonable terms is almost, it's something that doesn't happen very often. So instead of trying to do that again, my thought with this venture is, hey, let's develop some great concept. Let's have something that has a bunch of these great attributes. And something that's also just true about what's happening right now in Stratus is that our material can be produced more or less on existing material production assets that other companies already have running. So why would we buy and turn on and operate something that's pretty much, very close to what's going on elsewhere, when instead we should be collaborating with them and saying, hey, we've got this fantastic recipe. Our material is significantly differentiated from what's out in the market right now. You can make it on your equipment. Are you interested in working with us? And there's some sort of license agreement or a joint development agreement or other partnership that will, I think, be part and parcel of that.
Bill Gates, who founded Microsoft, was an investor in Aquion Energy, which sold for a loss in 2017. Despite that, his breakthrough energy invested in Stratus Materials, your current company. What do you think made Bill Gates come back?
It's interesting. Other investors we have also were invested in Aquion, and I think that there's a couple of reasons. One is that Aquion, even though it was not a profitable venture at the end of the day from an investment perspective, it was true to its word. At Aquion, we hit our technical targets and our cost targets. We just couldn't keep up with existing technology. That is to say, lithium-ion batteries got so good so fast that Aquion was kind of like left in a place where competing was difficult.
And got
Um,
cheaper than you expected them to get.
much cheaper and much
Yeah.
faster. That's exactly right. At the end of the day, energy storage is an economic proposition. It's a box that stores energy and has a cost. And we hit our goals, and our goals weren't lofty enough, and it's very difficult to get beyond the goals based on this technology that we're doing. So we just were honest about that. And I think the honesty and the fact that we credibly did what we said we were going to do gave our investors, obviously they were unhappy that it didn't, make a lot of money for them. But on the other hand, the team itself was successful, even though the product didn't, at the end of the day, compete on the marketplace in the U.S. So that was sort of a mixed result that gave our investors an appetite to work with us again. And the other thing is that in general, I think investors look for experienced entrepreneurs, and everyone will say that all experienced entrepreneurs have been through a couple of companies, and not all of them are successful, right? Or not all of them are home runs. And the idea is that we are smarter. We have seen things, and we've put together, a lot of the things that are happening in Stratus are based on learnings from Aquion, and that's a positive thing, I think, from an investment perspective.
You've been adding employees. I suspect you're out raising more money. What's the potential for Stratus? What do you think can happen in the next few years?
Yeah, so we're definitely raising money. We don't really want to get much bigger. I don't think than about 40 people anytime soon. I like that team size, and again, once things get much larger than that, it becomes a different kind of company. And happy to keep it small and focused. And the idea is to set up a pilot facility here in Pittsburgh and to produce material at the 100 to 200 kilograms a day pace, which is tens of tons a year kind of production. And that is enough for us to both convince end users that they can use this material in a meaningful way. So give them enough to put in large format packs or cells and so forth. And also to convince the materials producers that we're partnering with that the material can be made at full scale, and that they can come and learn from our pilot line and be like, yes, we can do this. We have the same kind of equipment. It just makes sense. And so that's sort of the exercise that we're in over the next 18 to 24 months. And it will end with an agreement, at least one agreement, maybe multiple agreements with folks who are materials producers to work with us to bring this material to market, hopefully to the customers that we've already convinced to want the material.
And make our batteries faster, safer, cheaper.
Cheaper and safer and more energy dense, all the things that we need these days. Yes.
Thank you so much. It's an amazing journey, and it's going to be great fun watching you do it a second time.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
You can read more about today's guest by visiting wuwm.com. Don't forget, you can listen to the show as a podcast if you'd like to take us on the go. Just search for Midwest Moxie wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Kathleen Gallagher. Midwest Moxie was created by executive producer Audrey Nowakowski and me. Today's episode was produced by Audrey Nowakowski and engineered by WUWM's Jason Reevy. Join us next Sunday at 7 p.m. to hear from more visionary Midwestern founders building innovative companies. That's right here on 89.7, Milwaukee's NPR. Support for Midwest Moxie comes from Microsoft, whose efforts to drive technology development across the Midwest and beyond include its National TechSpark community engagement work, which started in Wisconsin, its role as co-founder of Titletown Tech in Green Bay, and its new AI co-innovation lab at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. More information is available at Microsoft.com. And from Quarles & Brady LLP, a multidisciplinary Am Law 200 firm with approximately 550 attorneys who support large and small businesses, from Fortune 500 companies to startups and entrepreneurs across the country. More at Quarles.com.